This evening, we're in conversation with Jay Diengott of Gowntown and Claude Cantave, who studied carpentry here at North Bennett Street School.
Hello, everyone.
Recently and separately, Jay and Claude answered a loud call to action. They each pivoted their trade skills toward the greater need of the moment, fabricating PPE gear to aid in a global pandemic. With Artisans Asylum in Somerville as their incubator, Jay's Gowntown partner, Sarah Miller, created the prototype of the medical gown that ultimately Jay would take into full mass production in the facility where she is right now in Alston. You can see that all behind her. Claude Cantave was a student in our carpentry program when we closed due to COVID-19. He was working as an awesomenaut intern or volunteer at Artisans Asylum at that time when he jumped into the pool of makers of PPE back in March, focusing on face shields and facilitating a donation of Tyvek suits from our jewelry making program here at NBSS. So let's just dive in. Jay, first question is, what is Gowntown? We see it behind you, but what is it?
So Gowntown is what we ultimately ended up nicknaming our 3,000 square foot space, where we're producing isolation style gowns for medical workers. So we've gone through a handful of iterations of different materials, starting with landscape fabric, which was what was available back in March at the beginning of pandemic, and moving through actually Tyvek. And we've ended up on this material that you see here, which is bright blue, that is in fact medical grade COVID level, protective level fabric that we're making these gowns out of. We can't call them isolation gowns because they haven't been tested by the FDA. Restrictions during COVID were lifted a little bit, not lifted, but loosened for medical gowns to be able to make things more accessible to medical practitioners. But what you see is the production line that we've created in order to facilitate the making of, as of today, just over 27,000 pieces of medical protective equipment.
Wow. I was going to get to that, the statistics of how many you're producing and where they're ending up.
Well, actually, I will show you. So behind me, I don't know if you'll be able to see this super well, but this is my list every day of how many gowns we've made.
Oh, the check marks? Yes.
Yeah, all those check marks are counting gowns in the hundreds. So we're down here at the bottom in black right now, and we did 500 gowns. We've packaged 500 gowns today. There will be plenty more finished before tonight is through. And our gowns, the batch of 22,000 pieces that are coming out of this site in Brighton are technically owned by Get Us PPE, who gave us a grant. Mm-hmm. And they have a list of recipients that we should send the gowns to that are all over the US and include hospitals, they include rehab centers. I'm actually looking at some thank you notes right off of the computer. They've gone to some, let's see, some sort of family therapy centers, some addiction clinics, spanning the full gamut. When we opened, and we could choose where we wanted to send things to. So when we first opened this space, I was really insistent that anywhere that was on a reservation or that we knew was an area that was in particularly high need, that gowns would go there first, and those tended to be some of the smaller orders. We were able to fulfill that. So
you were able to control that to a certain extent? Yeah. Yep. That's great. What is, from the very beginning, what was your motivation and inspiration back in March when this just came to be?
Well, I teach in-person cooking classes, so I knew that I wasn't going to be working anytime soon, and I had some time on my hands. And Sarah had just started really researching whether or not it was even possible to make gowns, because face shields and ventilator pieces and all of these other protective objects were already being either delved into, or people had already figured out how to 3D print, laser cut, or otherwise fabricate them. And we said, well, nobody's making these gowns. They're the third most used piece of PPE in hospitals. How can we help? And not to take a totally biblical turn on you, but in the Talmud, one of the things that we're taught is that to save a life, it is as if you saved the world. And so it was really important to me when presented with this opportunity that I knew I was capable of, that I could help save lives.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to jump over to Claude because this whole thing was born at Artisans Asylum, and you are the connector from us to Artisans Asylum to PQ. You're the piece. So how did you discover them, and when did that happen? And tell us about your connection to Artisans Asylum.
I discovered them about, I would say about 1.5 years ago. I was looking for a place to weld. I'd learned welding a while back, and I didn't want to go out and, get all the equipment and everything. I wanted to take a class again and find a space where I could, build, work on projects. So I just did a quick Google search, and Artisans Asylum was at the, top of the search. So I signed up for a class. I took a couple of welding classes, and a metal. There's like another metal course where you.
Are you thinking of the brazing class?
No, just like, isn't it like the Metal Shop 101 or something?
Oh,
so you can
grind something.
Right,
else.
exactly. Yeah, and after that, I found, well, going to the classes, I found that you can actually volunteer there, and it's one of the things that I'm just sort of into, volunteering.
You said, I don't mean to stop you, but you said yesterday that Artisans Asylum is a place where you're there and you just wander around and ask if anybody needs help, and everybody's like, sure, here, do this.
Well, if you start talking to people and you tell them that you're an awesomenaut is a volunteer, is basically a volunteer, right? That works there. They kind of pull you into their project, because everyone is looking for, collaborations, and they're just always looking for someone to pull into their project.
Help. Yeah.
Yeah.
Extra hands.
Yeah, so I would go around, it's a huge facility, so you're kind of riding around. I ride around on a scooter, right? I don't know about you, PQ. 40,000 square feet, you need wheels. So I would just, talk to people, walk around, and they'd tell me about their projects, and they'd say, hey, do you want to build me this? You want to do this? So. And
so you were there when everything shut down, and you were focused on face shields, right?
Yes. So I reached out to Lars, who is the director of Artisans Asylum, and they quickly began. I guess it just naturally started to happen that people were organizing. It's a maker space. That's what people there do. They build things, and if they don't know how to do it, they learn, or people get together and they try to figure it out. That's like the nature of the entire maker community. And so I found out that they were I wanted to find out if there were any groups of people that were working on anything, and eventually I found out about the face shield group. There was a face shield. There's PQ and Sarah with the gowns, and there was another group they were doing masks, but I never met them. So I got onto the face shield group, and we just started cranking out face shields.
How many do you think that you were making? And do you know where they ended up? Was it local or?
Yeah, it was very local, like mostly in the Cambridge, Medford area, Tufts, Cambridge Hospital. There was another place, PQ, I'm not sure if you.
Boston Medical Center.
Oh, right, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So Mike Shia, one of our resident makers and a longtime member and board member, his son is a nursing student at BMC. And that was one of the big factors that pulled us in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you knew that, Claude. He was one of our consultants when we were working on gowns as well.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other connecting points was, Claude, when you worked with Ann Cahoon in our jewelry making program to grab some Tyvek suits.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with those? Where did they end up?
So they went directly to Artisans Asylum, and they were used for people who were making PPE.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they were dismantling those, and were you taking those apart and making
No, actually wearing them to make
to make the
face shields
PPE.
and
Got it.
yeah.
I just was thinking about something that Sarah had told me about in your initial stage in PQ. In your initial stages, you all were working with gardening material from Home Depot. Was that just part of the prototyping process, or was that a material that actually worked for gowns?
So the very first thing we did actually was take apart a Tyvek suit and figure out if we could turn Tyvek suits into isolation gowns. So a couple of your gowns went to that, or a couple of your suits turned into gowns. But it turned out to be a not very efficient process. But we did so much research into various standards for protective equipment through the FDA, through the CDC, and through OSHA, in terms of what materials could be used for protective gowns, what tests they needed to undergo in terms of water permeability. We had to measure the hydrostatic head, which is if you put the piece of material over some suction, how much suction does it actually take for the water droplet to permeate. We needed to measure the tensile strength of the seams. So if you pull on them, how much pressure does it take for those seams to pull apart and the fabric as a whole. And so back in March, one of the big problems was that we really had no idea how COVID spread, how people were going to catch it, what you needed to do to protect yourself. So as Claude said, we took those full body suits that you gave us, and that's what people were wearing, whereas you can see behind me, we're actually just wearing gowns now. But Tyvek was the first material we looked at because we knew that if you wrap a house with it, it has to be water resistant enough to protect the house. Therefore, it probably protects people. We knew that that was too expensive for us to use long term. And so as we were researching gowns, we found that they were made of this material called spun bond, or SMS, which is spun bond, melt blown spun bond. It's a sandwich. And the agricultural fabric was the closest thing that we could find that was made out of that material. Now, agricultural fabric is just a layer of spun bond. And one of the things that we learned is that that material comes in, it's the most common material on the planet right now. It's basically the equivalent of plastic cotton candy in the way that it's made, but it comes in a variety of weights. And we had a really hard time discovering the difference between agricultural grade spun bond and medical grade spun bond. And so the stuff that you see behind you, what the difference is, it turns out, is that there's an extruded plastic film over top of the material that actually keeps water from permeating. So those agricultural fabric gowns that Sarah and I made in the early days weren't the right thing, but they were the closest thing that we could make. And so we sent those out to, again, some of those non-medical facilities that you heard me mentioning at the beginning, whether they were daycare centers or nursing homes, places where people didn't need to be COVID protected, but where those places might have a stock of level 2 or level 3 gowns that could then be freed up to use for suspected or COVID positive patients. Whereas if you needed to be in a lower risk setting, if you're seeing somebody because they've got a scraped knee or some other clinical use, the agricultural gowns went to that.
So another grand thing about Gowntown that I love talking about, I talked to, or Sarah spoke to me about it a little bit, that you sourced anywhere between 7 and 10 gowns from different hospitals and reverse engineered them, created the prototype, you created the production line, and then you mapped all of that out to make it open source for maker spaces all over the country. So that's awesome. And do you know how many other maker spaces have tapped into your system and patterns and methodology?
I actually don't. I know that Sarah has continued to work with Get Us PPE to help other people create production lines where they're using 2mm plastic as their gown material, because not everybody just gets handed this $30,000 piece of equipment that is our ultrasonic bonder that we're using to create seams. And I know of at least 2 or 3 production lines that she's helped with, but I actually don't have a final number for you.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about
I know that Get Us PPE is actively recruiting people to do that.
Yes. Tell me back to the seam, the seamer, the ultrasonic something or another, because I want to point out that your gowns are not, they're heat sealed, they're heat sewn, they're not stitched. And
right. So stitching a gown creates holes, which obviously those holes are then permeable to liquids. So if somebody sneezes, you run a risk of getting COVID through your sleeves. So we use this machine called an ultrasonic bonder that the MIT Center for Bits and Atoms had sitting on their loading dock. They're frequently used for food packaging. They're used in the automotive industry. They're used to make inflatable art, but they are in fact what's used for medical gowns because they bond plastic. So the machine itself has a piezoelectric crystal in it that creates some number of hertz per minute that I have since forgotten. My apologies. But that crystal pulses so many times per minute, and the sound that it creates pressure, which creates heat. And like a sewing machine, it has, or a serger actually, it has both a feed wheel and a cut wheel. So when you run material through it, it both bonds and trims it at the same time.
mm-hmm.
And so Claude was volunteering at Artisans early on, and every other day he would come by gowns. We hadn't had our production line up and running yet, but we were still in testing, and he kept asking how he could help. And when I found out that he had experience woodworking, that to me seemed like a pretty natural corollary in order to be able to run something in a straight line without running over your fingers. So he was one of the first people that I actually taught to use the ultrasonic bonder before I really had a handle on how it worked, and before I had the 10,000 hours behind it that I've got now.
I love that story. I want to interject right there and ask Claude, when you were in taking carpentry in the carpentry program here, was that the first time that you had used a table saw?
No, because I wanted to be prepared for the program, so
So you practiced.
Yeah, I took some classes at the Elliott School in JP. So I took a woodworking class, I took an upholstery class, just to kind of be around, different tools and machinery and power tools, and so just to get my feet wet. Yeah.
What an interesting cycle for you. You were a lab technician, and then you came into the carpentry program.
Yeah.
You learned how to use the table saw, and then you ended up using those skills to run this device for Gowntown, and now you're back in the lab world. It's just this this cycle.
Yeah.
It's
well,
great.
Yeah, it's life happens, it's so crazy. I would have never thought that I would be back working in the lab again. But it seems like it's a different world, but we talked about it a little bit yesterday, and I thought to myself, I'm like, it's not so different. You're working in carpentry with either hand tools or other types of machinery. You're taking measurements, you're trying to be precise, you're making cuts, you're trying to minimize errors. And those things, it's the same thing working in the lab. You're doing the same thing, but it's using, I guess, different tools and different materials.
Well,
Yeah.
and like you said last night, which was great, you have to train your mind to be ambidextrous in a way, even if you aren't.
Right.
You're doing something with this hand while putting something in with that hand, and
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, you just have to be aware of, you know, where for example, in carpentry in the shop, you have to be aware where one hand is going where it shouldn't be going, and you're having another hand maybe doing the operation, whatever that is. It's the same thing in the lab. You'll have to use both hands, and just that overall awareness.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
While we're talking about trade schools, I'm going to pivot this into, I want to ask PQ about her background. You studied pastry at Johnson & Wales, which is a cooking trade school. And then you started dinner school, which is your own cooking school. What are all the well, not all of, it's probably a long list, but what's the most specific skill that you transferred over from that trade skill to this trade skill?
The ability that you develop working in kitchens to pay attention to 15 things all at once, which isn't quite multitasking, but is multi-awareness, is something that's been hugely helpful here. The ability to anticipate when, for example, one timer is going off and something else is coming to a boil and a third thing needs to be whatever, it doesn't matter. Those same skills are really useful in a multi-part production line where I'm trying to balance all of the different stations to make sure that everybody always has something to do and that no one action outpaces another. And I guess the other really big one is the ability to fix anything. Because in kitchens, things go wrong. And if you're in the middle of service, whether you're in a restaurant or you're catering, being able to pivot and either fix whatever broke or use a different tool is really, really valuable. And I'm not going to admit to the number of things that have broken or gone wrong here, but suffice to say, we were able to pivot and continue to work through all of those hiccups and be able to continue to push gowns out without too much distress, for which I feel incredibly lucky.
I mean, that is the word, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just am latching onto the word pivot. I mean, that is the word of the year, isn't it? And, you know, transferring your skills from one thing to another, stopping and assessing the situation and saying, what can I do, you know?
Yeah, one of the things that you and I talked about before is that I've spent a lot of time catering, and one of the things that you do in catering is rapidly setting up and breaking down production lines. Because if you have a plate of dinner for 300 people and your head table, your bride and groom or whoever they are, need to get fed at the same time as your second cousin, being able to understand how to stage the space properly and stage all of the items properly so that everybody gets food that's the same temperature and the same quality level applies here too, where we wanted, as I said before, I wanted to make sure that everything moved smoothly along this production line while also keeping everybody a safe distance apart from each other, which is such a strange challenge that we don't normally encounter in production. And because we really tried to spin this production line up very quickly and we're gonna meet our goal and finish and spin it down very quickly, we wanted to be able to turn it on and off rapidly the same way you would in a restaurant. And be able to reformat that space back to whatever it was before.
And you also mentioned to me earlier today about how you've had to, I think you used the word buffer, or just control the production line today specifically because you won't be there, or you're on this call with us for an hour. So if things get jammed up, so that skill must have come from the catering industry as well. I mean,
there's a lot of hurry up and wait that happens for example, in between courses. And so that's a really good way to look at what's going on right now, where I have the right number of people that the production line stops with the ultrasonic bonder, which is the thing that I usually operate. But we'll be able to switch once this call ends, and once I start running the bonder, then we can have people move over and start folding instead. But yeah, like I said, I'm taking Monday off, and so I want to make sure that this, because I won't be running that machine, there'll be enough to do on both sides of it that nobody will go without work, because we do have some paid employees that I don't want to mess with their financial situation, because they're important to me.
Yes, and that's a question that I would love to ask, and if you want to talk about it, are your hiring initiatives. That's one thing that we read about Gowntown is, in addition to your volunteer crew, you worked with Welcome Project of Somerville and the City of Boston's Office of Returning Citizens in your hiring. Can you talk to us about that? So
when we halfway through the production process, we moved from Artisans Asylum, where we realized we had really outgrown that space. And we won this grant from Get Us PPE to more than double the amount of gowns that we had produced to date. So we had produced 10,000 gowns at Artisans Asylum, and we were asked to produce a little over 22,000 gowns. We knew that we needed to move to a bigger space. And part of doing that was knowing that we couldn't count on all volunteers forever, because people were going to go back to work eventually, and you can't ask a volunteer to work a given number of hours or a certain number of shifts per week or the same shift, because then it starts to look like a job that you're not paying them for. And so we were shut down for a couple of weeks in June, but during that time was when the Black Lives Matter movement really started gaining traction, and we started talking a lot more about social and economic justice. And it was really important to me when we moved into this space that if we were going to hire people, I wanted them to be people that were disproportionately affected by COVID in terms of being able to get jobs. I had worked with the Office of Returning Citizens in the past. I lived and volunteered at Haley House when I was in school, and they also do a transitional employment program. So that was something that I felt really comfortable with. And we also were able to work with the Welcome Project, as you said, to be able to grant opportunities to folks who, because of their language skills, might be really skilled workers, but were struggling to find something that would hire them at the time. So I've ended up with 2 folks from Haiti, one of whom was a nurse and is actually she just started working in a hospital again. I'm really thrilled for her. And then somewhere in the back behind me, I've got one of my folks here from the Transitional Employment Program who, because of us, was just able to get approved for a loan for a car. So she'll be able to be mobile again. Mm-hmm. And we're able to also provide her with letters of recommendation so that she can get a job going forward from here. And those are things that were important to me to be able to provide. And I'm really thrilled that we've been able to do that.
Yeah, and I asked you this before. I mean, I first have to just state that it's a model that should set the standard for unconventional hiring in our communities and in the trades communities, craft communities. I mean, it's awesome. And my question for you before was, did you set out, and I think you already answered it, you set out to build a company that would do this? It wasn't consequential.
It was absolutely intentional to me to be able to be sort of extra inclusive. Like I said, there have been so many jobs that are closed and opportunities that are closed during COVID that it was really important to me to provide those opportunities to people who might be extra othered. The staff member that's behind me told me that in the halfway house she's living in, most of the other recent releases had a really hard time finding jobs. And so to have this has been really huge for her. And the other thing that you'll see actually that I think is really cool, and unfortunately I don't know enough about North Bennett to speak to your practices, but right now, both of my cutters, both the folks who are operating our very heavy and really ridiculous fabric saw are women. And it's really important to me that we let anybody who wants to do so safely be able to use a power tool and feel empowered to do that. So that's been something that I've been pushing for here as well.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And we appreciate it. I'm going to jump over to Claude, and
Okay.
I want to ask you and I'll ask both of you this, but what was the most rewarding part of your time doing this work at Artisans Asylum? It was the most rewarding part. I mean, you're giving your time, but.
Right. Well, I have a lot of people that work in healthcare, that work directly on the front lines at hospitals, and it was important for me to, it was just natural. I know there wasn't even a thought. I felt the need to help, and it just it wasn't even a conversation I had with myself. It was something that I know that needed to get done. The shortages just never really were actually met when we really needed it. And I just dedicated as much time as possible that I could to do it. And that itself, that was enough for me.
I mean, that's something very specific to makers and crafters and tradespeople in general, is that if you, just like you said before, PQ, just because you can make it, you should, because you have the hands, and the will and the urge, and it's just, it makes it easier for you to jump in and just do what's needed.
Right.
So what would you say to North Bennett Street School students about Artisans Asylum, and even about volunteering? Let's take it there. Like, would
Okay.
you, yeah.
If you're a North Bennett Street student, it's mandatory. You have to check out the space. There's every single tool imaginable. There's, metal shop, wood shop, CNC, plasma cutter, let's see, the jewelry making,
Laser shop,
electronics.
3D printer.
Yeah, exactly.
Welding really sounds awesome. Just that you can just walk in and weld. I mean, is that what you can do?
Well, you would have to get signed off on everything first. You have to demonstrate that you can, use the tools, but then
Right.
after that, you're good to go. And I think for North Bennett Street students, if you're in a certain program, going over to Artisans Asylum may open your eyes to, designing or making something that you haven't even thought of, because there's so many brilliant people there. I mean, I've met so many interesting people there, and ideas just sort of just pop into your head, and you just having the access to all these people, plus all of the equipment, all the tools.
Mm-hmm.
You have to at least visit the place and take a tour, and take it from there, because I'm sure if students go over there and they check it out, they'll be inspired to do something there.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty common and I may be off the mark saying this, but cabinet and furniture making student will go into a wood shop, a cooperative, and that only builds furniture and only is working with wood. A binder might go work in a bindery. So that asset alone, just to be around welders,
Mm-hmm.
just makers of all different scope. I mean, it's only going to enhance what you make.
Right. And the way that the building, I think it's intentionally sort of just open, and there are really no clear defined boundaries and walls. So just walking around, there's this, every every corner that you turn, you see something new, and there are no boundaries for what goes on there. So it turns into a lot of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so just like you said, you may work with one material, but you know, you could be walking down a hallway and you have this other person 3D printing or making something, you know, maybe they're into robotics or something, and you know, you may end up on a team or doing some type of collaboration, doing something completely different from what you do in your, you know, your personal life.
Yeah, I saw a video of some sculptors in there that were making the huge owl heads for an outdoor park in Santa Fe or something that were, you know, rotating.
Mm-hmm.
Just really something. And I'm going to pivot that into my big question for Jay. I don't know if everybody knows this, but Jay's unofficial street name is PQ. And as far as I know it, well, PQ stands for Pastry Queen. And as far as I know it, it's you got that name within the kinetic sculpture racing community, which is just this fascinating part of your tinkering self. And I think you need to tell us about it.
So I'll actually step you back even a little bit further. One of the shops that Artisans provides is a bicycle shop, but the bicycle shop is run by your friendly neighborhood bicycle chopper gang, Skull. So we have access to the metal shop, to some equipment that Skull members own, and we build and ride tall bikes and long bikes and swing bikes and homemade tandems. And basically, if you've ever seen a weird, freaky art bike, we've built one, we've ridden one, we've taken it apart again. We've hopefully not experienced blunt facial trauma while riding them. But as part of the group, our motto is to be the superhero version of yourself. And so everybody, upon entrance to the group, picks their own nickname. And ideally, you pick a nickname that sounds best with "don't mess with." So in my case, "don't mess with Pastry Queen." And as the queen of all things hot and sharp, that seems pretty apropos. So I came to Artisans because somebody told me I could learn to build and ride a tall bike. And well, that was the second thing I did. The first thing I did was make myself a pair of earrings on the wood lathe. But the second thing I did was learn to build and ride a tall bike, which meant learning how to use all of the things in the metal shop. And with a background in culinary arts, I wasn't really afraid of anything that was hot or sharp. I didn't really have a fear of burning myself or getting cut, which then pivoted into helping run the metal shop for the better part of 2 years. But part of bicycle chopping is that it got me involved with kinetic sculpture racing, which is known as the triathlon of the art world. So using a criteria of art, speed, and engineering, we build amphibious, human-powered all-terrain vehicles that are raced through courses as short as 5 miles and as long as 50 miles. And so the first time you and I talked, I was working on, we have a 400-pound, 14-foot-long lobster tricycle boat thing that we were taking for a pleasure cruise down the Charles River that we actually did last weekend, and that was really great.
Yes.
But that particular machine was driven to California and raced on the 50th anniversary of the original kinetic sculpture race from Arcata to Eureka, California, up in Humboldt County. So that's a whole thing.
That is a whole thing.
Opportunity that our local race is actually in Lowell, Massachusetts. And so we went to both the 49th and the 50th anniversary races to get an idea of the sorts of machines that can survive a 50-mile course, that we could build things for our 5-mile course in Lowell. And so my partner has raced 4 out of the last 5 years, being that there is no race this year. I've raced 2 of the last 5 years in Lowell.
And when you say race, how fast are we talking here?
Good question. The first year.
Not fast, right?
So, are you familiar with Rule 0?
No.
Don't make me have to make a rule. So the very first year of the race, my partner and his best friend set out for themselves to either build, it either couldn't be a bicycle or it couldn't be something else. I don't remember. So they ended up building a machine that had bicycle drivetrains, but 2 snowmobile treads. And the race organizers told them that they had the whole day so they could go whatever speed they wanted to. And at the end of the race, they made a new rule that said you had to go faster than the bubbles coming out of your bubble cannon, because the top speed of that machine was a whopping 2 miles an hour. So machines typically are hoped to go faster than 5 miles an hour. The first year I raced, I won the speed award. So we were basically on the bumper of the pace car the entire race. And then last year I designed something that we call cinnamon rolls, or it's affectionately known as buns of steel, because instead of turning from side to side like a normal bicycle, the front wheel is a 3-foot long lawn roller, and the bicycle actually pivots this way. So you're using your core to steer it instead of your shoulders.
Wow. Claude, have
Claude,
you ever
remind me, I'll
seen
show
this?
it to you later.
Have you ever seen these in action?
I haven't. No.
Well, you saw the biker gang in Artisans Asylum,
Yeah,
right?
I would see them, and I would, you come in and you like the first kind of past the front desk to the right.
Mhm.
You see the bike section, but I've never seen anyone outside riding them.
If you let me screen share for a second, I can show you cinnamon rolls.
All right.
Sure.
So, you've disabled screen sharing. I don't know if you can turn that on.
I don't know if I can in this moment.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'd have to go into my.
That's okay. Let me just get a link, and I'll drop a link into chat here.
Okay.
PQ,
so
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Have you ever made any wooden bikes?
I haven't, but we've talked pretty extensively about working on some bamboo bicycles.
Mm.
We actually,
that would be cool.
That comes back to a really interesting story that I was going to share, which is that one of the other opportunities that we've had through Skull was to actually go teach bicycle building and chopping and maintenance in Lithuania to some groups of students. The first year we were in a place on the Baltic Sea that was pretty akin to being in northern Maine, where the town was really dying out. And so we were staying in an a recently deserted school. And so while we didn't build the bicycles out of wood, we incorporated a lot of desk chairs into bicycles in various ways.
Really?
Just used what you had, what was there.
Used whatever was there. So we were quite literally pulling a barn apart. Any metal struts, anything that we found was fair game. And so we were talking about this earlier because that program was really important to me, to be able to teach welding and industrial arts and design to young people, to folks that are in their teens. We worked with, they have trade schools, from what I understand, are fairly popular in Europe, but particularly in Lithuania. So we worked with students from an art high school and an engineering school. And actually we saw these kids 2 summers in a row. But to be able to teach them that the industrial arts was an opportunity that was open to them, but especially to female identifying students, that absolutely they could learn to weld or they could run an angle grinder, and it wasn't something that they had to be afraid of. And we have a whole bunch of triumphant pictures of folks who didn't think that they'd ever have an opportunity to basically use what amounts to a metal glue gun to build tall bikes or otherwise really strange pieces of sculpture to create the visions that they saw in their heads. And that was incredibly special. And that's something that I really, I spend a lot of time commuting by tall bike because I hope to continue to inspire people to know that they can learn how to weld. It's not actually that difficult, and that they can then turn it into a trade because welders are so in demand right now. Yeah,
there's a group that I'm just obsessed with. That's a group of young 8 to 14-year-old girls that have joined this club where they learn how to use power tools. That's all they do. They're not, well, they're making a product, but the focus is to teach them how to use power tools. And it's what you're talking about, you know, teaching somebody that they don't have to be terrified of a torch or a heavy tool or something like that.
That's so cool.
I mean, Claude, how did you feel, you know, coming here? Did you have fear of some, you know, some of the equipment? Not that you're a little 8-year-old girl, but you're, that's not.
Listen, a table saw can chop your hand off the same way. You know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't,
doesn't matter who you are.
Doesn't care, that's why I went to the Elliott School before, just so I could, you know, get the butterflies out of my stomach, you know, and so I wouldn't be nervous. But it's, you know, we've got this this table, the Tanowitz. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it. I don't know if I've seen it, but
you've heard
mega.
of the Tanowitz.
I've heard of the Tanowitz.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna name any names, but it's very intimidating. And even while we were in the program, people kind of avoided it, even though like the line was shorter for the Tanowitz, and people just kind of said, "Oh, I'll wait for the, you know, for the saw stop," because the saw it has a, you know, it has a technology that saw drops if you, They're like, "All right, I'll wait for the saw stop." So
the Tanowitz doesn't have a saw stop?
No, it was built like in the, I'm gonna just say the 50s or maybe even before that.
Wow.
And it's a heavy duty piece of American machinery that just.
Wow.
My fingers are scared just listening to you talk about it.
Yeah.
No, PQ, you need to come over. I don't know if you've been here before.
I haven't, and I'd really like to when it's safe to do that.
Yes, and I have to note for everybody who's with us, I just need to acknowledge PQ is wearing her mask because she's surrounded by people in an enclosed space, and that's what you're supposed to do. And I just want to appreciate that and acknowledge that. Even though you're on a program right now, you're talking to us, you're with your mask, and we can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, thank you so much for being understanding of that when I talked to you about that earlier today.
Yeah, of course.
I want to make sure I get to keep them safe so that they'll keep volunteering for me.
Yeah, exactly. We're almost at time, and I want to open up for maybe 10 minutes of questions. If anybody has any questions for PQ or Claude, you can unmute yourself. I don't think there are too many of us, and ask your question, or put it in a chat and I'll ask. Don't see too many questions coming in.
I can't speak for Claude, but I promise I don't bite, at least not over the airwaves.
I just love the movement behind you, PQ. I love seeing action, you know, the action behind you. And how late do they go tonight? How late do your volunteers work tonight?
So we have 3 shifts a day, most days. I have a shift that runs from 10 to 1, and then 2 to 5, and then 6 to 9. I wanted an hour between each shift to give me a chance to eat and catch up if need be, but also to give the space time to air out in between volunteers. I am not a scientist, and I don't know a lot about how aerosol works, but I understand that if I spend a lot of time with fans on blowing it towards the exit, that should help to clear the air for folks who are here for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, PQ. Could you mention a little bit more about the funding you received there at Gowntown from Get Us PPE?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mike Shia, who I mentioned all the way back at the top of the program, his son is in the nursing program at BMC. He actually applied for this grant for us through Get Us PPE, where we were given $77,000. And we did the math to figure out how many gowns that we could make. And through that, we came to agreement as to what we would deliver and when, and how it would get shipped out into the world. And the larger answer to that is I actually don't know much more beyond that, except for how many gowns we have to make.
Right. Do you, I have a few more questions, but one that I had earlier was, what are your immediate hurdles right now with Gowntown?
So
Like
one
today?
that we, oh, today, getting enough volunteers to finish this project. At the beginning, when we had first moved from Somerville, we had a bunch of volunteers that had joined us back in March and April, but people have had to go back to work. And so I haven't had consistent volunteers throughout the day or throughout the season. Although I did just get a really lovely offer from a hockey team, actually, to come in and staff a couple of our shifts as a team building exercise. But the more volunteers I get, the faster we can be done here.
Mm-hmm. A question from McKee Berkman. Do you have ideas about your next pivot once the COVID crisis is over? Yeah.
So
You'll know the day of, right?
Yeah, you mentioned back at the top that I run a one-on-one in-person cooking class called Dinner School, and I also work for a business that teaches children's nutrition and cooking classes. And so I suspect that I will go back to writing some of the curriculum for that, but that certainly won't be full-time. And well, if anybody's looking for a process engineer, I guess that's probably the next thing I'm looking at. But who knows? I am continually impressed with my own ability to change direction, to pivot, as it were. And we'll see what falls into my lap.
Everything you're absorbing while doing this. I mean, that's the other thing about adapting and pivoting and moving, is that you're also learning new skills every step of the way.
I have an idea for you, PQ.
What you got, Claude?
Continuing ed class at North Bennett Street School. Bamboo bicycle making.
So my partner would actually be the one to talk to about that, and
yeah,
I guess
great.
I'll introduce him to Kristen.
Yeah. Another comment and question for you. Gowntown represents such creativity, work, and skill with great impact under unexpected circumstances. If COVID never happened, what path were you otherwise on? What did you imagine doing otherwise?
Well, as I was just talking about, is I was teaching cooking classes to humans, both large and small. And I was covered in the Globe and on Fox Boston in the last year for Dinner School. And I had been working really hard on growing this business and hoping to be able to make that full time at some point in the future. But I think it'll be quite some time before I'm willing to teach in people's houses. And I know that you can teach classes online, but cooking is one of those things that you need to be there to smell and to taste and to feel. And I'm not willing to do that through a computer. That's a sacrifice I just don't want to make.
100%. From Amy, Amy is really impressed with your networking skills. Can you tell us how you found your partners? For example, how did you find space and equipment?
So, as I mentioned, the Ultrasonic Bonder came from the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT. I think I told you that. I'm not sure I mentioned that during the program. But one of the amazing things about Artisans Asylum is its connection to the maker community at large, not just to its members, but to MIT and various other organizations, BAMI, the Boston Area Mask Initiative, that we were connected with through Cambridge Innovation Center, for example, being another one. The saw that we're using to cut, we purchased, but one of the things you may have heard about, but I'm not sure you saw, is that part of cutting was that we designed custom hole saws in order to cut the neckline, the waistline, and the thumb holes. And so members of Artisans were able to design those for us based on a real quick and dirty prototype that I made in the metal shop one night when we were trying to figure out how we were going to put thumb holes in gowns. The space actually was made available to us through Harvard. Artisans as a whole is moving into this business park here in Alston, Brighton, sometime in 2021. And because of that, Harvard was able to offer us this space for an extended period of time at a below market rate so that we could make gowns, because they saw what we were doing and thought it was really important and impressive. And they wanted to be able to help with that. And we all know Harvard likes to look good in the eyes of the public. So that's how we got here. Other than that, one of the jokes that I've made, speaking of partners, is that fully 1/3 of our volunteers were my friends beforehand. I'm part of this bicycle chopper gang. I teach at a local climbing gym. I put myself out in the community in a lot of different ways. And so I was lucky enough to have lots of different folks who were available to help with this, and have been lucky enough to become friends with fully another 1/3 of the volunteers that we've had. And it's all about, you know, being able to have a conversation with somebody and then remembering key details about them that you can ask them about next time. Because as soon as somebody feels like you care about them, then you can use their help going forward.
You just hit on something that brings this full circle for me, that this conversation, when it was pieced together between you and Claude, the underlying theme was adaptability and community. And you just, I mean, what you just said, putting yourself out into your community, just you bring all of that energy to yourself and contacts, and it's just awesome. Yeah.
I feel really lucky that I was in the right place at the right time to be able to help with this.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, you've said it. Claude, do you have any last words to share?
I think there should be a lot more collaboration between North Bennett and Artisans Asylum. I thought there would be just, I thought I would go to Artisans Asylum and, think that I would meet some people that had some kind of association with North Bennett Street School, but, I didn't really find that. And considering that there's a wood shop there, there are a lot of jewelry makers, right? And there's just so many different types of people that I think would, benefit from being around each other, and just at least that networking aspect of getting together and collaborating. So
broadening your circle.
Yeah, and absolutely. And if there's some way that the two communities can get together, I think that would be fantastic.
Well, I think we've started it here, so I don't see any going backwards now.
Right.
We're here at 7:30, and I just want to thank you both for all of your contributions to PPE gear and hearing the call to make. We all thank you for it.
You're welcome.
And thank you to everybody who came this evening. Thank you for joining us. We're grateful to PQ and Claude for your time and sharing your perspectives with us. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you so much for giving us this avenue to share with you. And
yes,
Claude, I hope you're the first in a very long line of NBSS students that come through Artisan's doors, because we could sure use more knowledge.
Yeah, I expect more to come.
We appreciate it, everyone, and we thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, PQ.
Thank you, Claude.
So much, Kristen. Claude, it was such a pleasure to work with you this summer.
It was a pleasure. And I need to come by and see Gowntown and come back to Artisans Asylum and say hi to everyone,
Yeah, please do. Our doors are always open to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, Claire. I see Claire there. I just want to say hi.
Yeah, we have a lot of people saying, great, thank you. Thank you for the great conversation. Claire says hi. All right, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you all soon.
Have a great night.
Take care. Good night.
Thank you.